They have a data problem that's wearing an AI costume because if you don't have accurate data, it doesn't matter what you do, you just do it faster.
I understand you have a contrarian take.
AI doesn't fix the problem, it exposes it.
You are wasting everyone's time if you're diving into this and you haven't cleaned up that data first.
We run our business with 3 main systems, right? But guess what? They don't all have the same edits. It's always the data that's the biggest rock. That's the problem that we have today. I look at this as waste because you have to have somebody manually go in and correct it. And we're in a business that's growing. Reducing our cycle time, reducing our lead time, and having quality data is so important to us. You have to have ownership for everyone in the business for your master data items and make sure that they own it and they're accountable for it.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of Manufacturing the Future. I'm Lisa Bounds, Principal Product Marketing Manager here at Epicor and one of the hosts of the show.
And I'm Ellen, Senior Product Marketing Manager of AI and co-host. We're excited to be back with another conversation focused on people, technologies, and strategies shaping the future of manufacturing.
Today we're speaking with Stephen Hightower, Chief Technology Officer at Harmar.
Stephen has spent more than 15 years operating at the intersection of manufacturing, enterprise technology, and private equity value creation. Throughout his career, he served as CTO, COO, interim CIO, and operating advisor, helping organizations navigate rapid growth, ERP transformations, cybersecurity challenges, and post-acquisition integrations.
His track record includes scaling technology and service delivery during hypergrowth at YETI, building technology roadmaps that supported successful company exits, applying lean methodologies to dramatically improve business processes, and helping place technology leadership within sponsor-backed organizations across a variety of industries.
Today, Stephen serves as CTO of Harmar, where he leads enterprise transformation efforts focused on scalable growth, product innovation, and operational excellence.
Harmar is a leading manufacturer of mobility and accessibility solutions, including vehicle lifts, stair lifts, vertical platform lifts, and home elevators. Since its founding in 1998, the company has been dedicated to helping people maintain their independence and improve their quality of life through meaningful innovation.
The company has also built a strong culture along the way, earning Great Place to Work certification since 2021 based on employee feedback and experience.
Stephen brings a unique perspective because he doesn't just focus on technology itself. He focuses on how technology creates confidence, operational discipline, and business value, especially in manufacturing environments where growth can quickly outpace infrastructure.
Stephen, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So, Stephen, I want to actually jump in right off the bat today with some questions. And I think we're going to dive into a topic that I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard a lot about. Everyone's talking about AI within manufacturing, but I understand you have a contrarian take. So, I want to hear what is kind of the uncomfortable truth from your perspective that most manufacturers maybe don't want to hear.
Yeah. Well, they have a data problem that's wearing an AI costume because if you don't have accurate data, it doesn't matter what you do, you just do it faster. AI doesn't fix the problem, it exposes it. And so here at Harmar, what we're doing is focusing on a master data initiative to make sure that we have accurate data before we just start using AI. Obviously, we have edge cases where we leverage AI for where it makes sense. But when I was running manufacturing for General Electric earlier in my career, and I would walk the floor, I would always ask the operators, where's your cheat sheet that you're using to be able to tell you how to build the product? Because in the office, it's the spreadsheets that people keep that tell them how to do their job and where they really sort of correct the problems in the systems today. We run our business with 3 main systems, right? An engineering system, an ERP system, and a customer sales system. And we have all those integrated with one another. But guess what? They don't all have the same edits. So one thing in one system fits and it doesn't fit in the other system. And it's really no different than any time people have tried to convert from one ERP system to the next, right? It's always the data that's the biggest rock in trying to make the conversion. And that's the problem that we have today. So we're focused on the master data initiative to be able to resolve that. And we're putting the same edits across all three systems so that we don't have that problem. Because as a Lean Six Sigma black belt, I look at this as waste because anytime you have errors and you're integrating into another system, you have to have somebody manually go in and correct it. It creates waste. And that is something that I'm focused on reducing to make sure that we have accurate data and we reduce the integration failures that we are experiencing and driving those down to zero. And that way, I've put a moratorium on development because it's important to fix the data and do that correctly before we move on.
Totally agree. I think this is actually a conversation we've been having a lot internally and just around like the level of importance of that data foundation. So it's definitely a key space that I think is not getting enough attention in relation to the amount of noise that is happening on kind of AI fronts.
I'm nodding so much because we were literally having this conversation probably within the past hour. And so it's so relevant right now. And you hear the terms trash in, trash out used a lot when talking about this, but you're hearing it because for the same reason that cliches are cliches, they're true. And it's so true with the data story. Like you are wasting everyone's time if you're diving into this and you haven't cleaned up that data first. It's so vital.
Yeah, and people have lived with it for so long, right? Because they just do manual workarounds, it's tribal knowledge, it's not following the process, and that creates the issues that drive cycle time in your business. And I think there are really probably only 3 metrics that I think that really matter in a manufacturing environment, and that's your cycle time, that's your quality, and that's your unit cost. And if you focus on those 3 things, then you will get better. You will absolutely change your business and be able to focus on the right things. But, you don't need 100 KPIs. You need, at least in my opinion, those 3.
That makes sense. And that's a perfect segue for us to move into you walking us through your background a little bit. Like, how did you get to those KPIs? So, walk us through your background. You've worn a lot of hats across manufacturing and technology. And what is kind of the through line that's connecting all of it? Because, you came here to this point somehow. What is that connection point?
Yes, I was a software developer, software engineering early in my career, and the item that really changed the paradigm for me was when I was working for General Electric and they wanted to move me into different rotational assignments outside of technology. And the first rotational assignment I went into was the quality organization. So I went from a technology into actually a product delivering uh, product to the federal government and having to get sign off. And then I rotated into the manufacturing organization. And I remember a discussion that I was having with the ERP analyst, or actually MRP at that time, showing my age, about something that I wanted to have done. And it was so frustrating when I was talking to him in terms of, well, you can't do this, you can't do that, we have to have this before we make a change. At that point, I became really focused on the business. What drives the business? What's best for the business? How do we solve the problems? It's not just about technology. It's about how do you solve the business problems? Because technology is just a lever. It doesn't really matter. And when people put in technology, they need to make sure that they're solving a business problem. And then, as I went through that, I worked for Lockheed Martin for a long period of time, and then when I took early retirement from Lockheed Martin, I started consulting for private equity. And I spent the last 15 years consulting for private equity in a variety of different verticals. YETI was my first customer, and that was just an amazing experience because, the product was just great, people were great, they were selling crazy amounts of product, so that was, my first assignment in the private equity consulting space, and then I worked in a number of other, different ones and verticals, and then actually, Harmar has been a client since 2014, and, I started, doing just, intermittent work with them, come in, run a Kaizen process improvement event or look at a technology selection. And then the CEO and I were talking one night after I had done my latest assignment. He said, "Hey, I could really use you to come on board. We're really experiencing some items that I think you could help with." And I said, "Well, let's talk about it." And I accepted a job working at Harmar in September of last year. So it's been a lot of fun. I think with enough information, you can solve any problem. And so if you're running a manufacturing business, which we are, you've got to make the trains run on time. So one of the first things that I did was to put a monitoring tool in place to be able to give me insight into where the failures and the problems were because our ERP system was not the most reliable at that point in time. Our monthly financial closing had issues in terms of errors and integration, and I'm happy to say that now we have a very stable system and our financial closing is no longer an issue. We do it and it works and I don't I don't, stay awake at night on that anymore.
That's good. What I'm hearing is essentially that kind of through line for you is you're an investigator in a lot of ways. You're digging in, figuring out where the problems are so that you can solve them.
Right.
So it's Detective Hightower in a lot of ways.
Well, you've got to be a problem solver,
Yeah.
right? That's how you have to look at it. That's the advice that I gave my daughter when she went to work. I'm like, they hire you to be a problem solver. And that's the mindset that you need to take anytime you go into a business. And I think, the things that we're doing at Harmar, we help people stay in their homes. We we provide mobility, you know, solutions for people to stay in house versus having to go to an assisted living facility. And we're doing things that actually help people have a better life. And that mission is important. My mom's 90 years old.
So it especially resonates. Yes.
I was going to ask, and I guess I will reframe the question because I feel like you kind of already answered a little bit. I was going to be asking around manufacturers or kind of saying their systems aren't working the way they should. What usually kind of reveals itself to be the underlying problems underneath that? Do you have, I guess I'll pivot and ask it this way because you were kind of talking about getting curious and problem solving and Lisa equated that to like detective work. Do you have kind of an approach when you are approaching a new problem of what that process kind of looks like for you in terms of getting to the bottom of things?
Yeah, I mean, I typically want to make sure that we document a problem statement to get everybody on the same page, right? Because when you look at problems, people have different perspectives, different experiences, and so until you put it down on paper, and I have a whiteboard in my office that I use every day, and we bring people in and we look at what the problems are and we draw out solutions, right? Because pictures are worth a thousand words. And so I think by doing that and finding out what the actual picture looks like, and then you start drilling down into where you have the different issues and where the problems are. And we tracked the errors and the integration issues that we have. And we're not different from any other, mid-sized manufacturer because you usually have a number of different systems that you're using. But part number in one system doesn't mean the same thing as part number in another system. And as you look at it, you have to be able to understand the details in order to be able to do the root cause analysis and corrective action. And that's one of my biggest focuses is root cause analysis and corrective action. And that's what I tell my team every day when we have errors. let's look at the root cause. Let's identify the corrective action so that we don't just continue to fix the same problem every day. And that's what was happening. And now, as we go through the root cause analysis and we find out where the issue was, then we put the correction, we mistake proof it. That's really what we're doing. We're mistake proofing it and not allowing people to put data in that's going to be a problem as it moves through the system.
Again, setting me up for the perfect segue, bringing it back to data. For someone who hasn't heard the term before, what is master data management and why should a manufacturing leader care about that?
Master data management is about the key data elements in your system that have to be correct and have to match. And you have to be able to make sure that they are correct. And we run a master data program, an initiative where we clearly identify the owners, who owns it, who's responsible for it. We call it a CRUD matrix, right? Who can create, who can read, who can update, who can delete. And we use that along with the RACI matrix in terms of the responsibilities to be able to make sure that people have ownership. Because if we have a description for our part number and we can't agree on a single owner, then we can't solve the problem. So you have to have the data ownership in the business to be able to drive that master data management program consistently and accurately across the business.
That makes perfect sense to me. I'm a big fan of the racy method, so I think I may have to borrow the crud from you as well.
I was gonna say I haven't heard of crud before, but now I'm gonna be using it going forward because that's brilliant. We had some great conversations recently at Epicor Insights around like data governance, things like that. And I feel like frameworks like that are so valuable right now. In addition to the discussions around, data quality of just how do you continue to manage it going forward.
Half the battle's just organizing yourself internally and people figuring out where do I put my thoughts at. So very helpful. I am sealing that one.
All right, Stephen, I want to chat a little bit more just in terms of companies running multiple systems at once. So maybe there's ERP, CRM, you've got engineering platforms, other technology kind of in the space. From your perspective, what does it look like when those systems aren't necessarily agreeing with each other? Like, where are risk problems introduced in that scenario?
Well, they're integrated, so you have to track the error rate that goes between each system. And then you have to look for the spreadsheet that people are keeping to be able to correct the data. So it's very similar to the analogy when I would walk out on the floor and ask the operators, where's your cheat sheet? Well, in the office, it's where's your spreadsheet that you're keeping to be able to put the correct data in? And that is really, I think, the key is understanding that because when you have a business that has a professional organization, everybody has a spreadsheet. Well, we can't believe the data in the system. We keep a spreadsheet over here so that we know what the right data is. But then that creates another issue, which is why the master data initiative is so important because then once you get that in place, people will have confidence in your systems and confidence in the data. And once you do that, then you eliminate the need to keep an external, disconnected spreadsheet for people to use.
Now, I would say that you've probably already touched on this in your answer, but in those different systems, when they're all, not really agreeing with each other, that kind of data problem costs manufacturers something in real business terms. Can you drill down more on what those costs end up being?
Well, their productivity costs, their cycle time cost, right? Because you create waste in the system. So people have to manually go in and correct the problems, and they're not focused on the flow, on the process that they should be. So it creates a cycle time issue, and you're not as productive as you should be in order to be able to do it. And we're in a business that's growing. And so reducing our cycle time, reducing our lead time, and having quality data is so important to us, and that's why we have a laser focus on it to be able to do it. And then we're doing, AI as an initiative, um, and we're using a digital worker in terms of being able to field phone calls, be able to have our sales rep, our customer care organization move up the value chain in terms of being able to help our customers and help them realize what their objectives are. So there are cases where we're able to do that because we have good data and, a digital worker is a piece of that that you can do independently. But when you look at your total business system and your main business systems, you have to focus on keeping that data clean. You have to have ownership for everyone in the business for your master data items and make sure that they own it and they're accountable for it.
Stephen, I want to pivot a little bit and talk more around something that came up earlier in the interview. You were talking about applying Lean Six Sigma to technology strategy. And I wanted to kind of hear a little bit more around how a discipline that most people tend to associate with shop floor kind of translates into your approach in fixing something like a broken tech stack.
Sure. Well, a broken tech stack creates waste. The first Lean Six Sigma program that I did in technology was in the late 90s. And I was doing software distribution um, in a business for Lockheed Martin to around 25,000 different desktops every day. And I woke up one night in a panic thinking, I have no metrics. I have no idea in terms of the quality. Am I causing problems? I mean, and these were devices that were connected to business critical processes. And so as I thought about that, I started investigating, lean and looking at Six Sigma in terms of how do you leverage that and put that in place. And that's my first project that I did was based upon having a business problem of not having enough insight and being able to have the data to be able to solve those problems. And then we expanded it and I, you know, did one of those things that I probably shouldn't have done. I said, we're going to be at a 4.2 sigma level in a year on these 10 critical business processes. And the team stepped up and we did it. But that was very early on. And then later as Lean Six Sigma became more popular, it became much more instantiated in Lockheed Martin where I was working at that time.
A lot of manufacturers have grown through acquisition and then they suddenly find themselves with systems that don't talk to each other. How do you start untangling that?
Well, you have to do the mapping between the different systems, and you have to have the common language of what's the customer number over here? Is it a 8-digit field, alphanumeric? Is it a 10-digit over here? It's alphanumeric, but it really doesn't mean anything. And then you get into all the user defined fields that people put in as they go through. So you have to go through that mapping exercise because it really becomes a data issue because people name different fields the same thing and they use them in different ways, and you have to go through that, and that's hard work, but you have to go through the data mapping, otherwise you just continue to generate the same errors and you have the same problems.
On average, how long do you typically find that mapping process takes?
It depends, it varies,
It
it depends
varies. It
upon
depends. The age-old business school answer.
it depends on the culture of the business, it depends upon, can you articulate the actual business problem that it presents. And if you can come up with the right business case in terms of how it will impact the business in terms of either revenue, cycle time reduction, productivity, or driving down unit cost, then you can make the case and get people aligned. But that's one of the issues when you do add-ons and acquisitions. And I'm in private equity. That's what we do. That's the standard play. We buy a platform company and then we go out and we do acquisitions and we grow the business and then private equity sells it. And that's the standard playbook. But you have to go through and you have to do the mapping and you have to do that hard work to be able to get to really a common vocabulary among the different.
Yeah, I that's such a smart approach too, and just in terms of like taking the time to do the mapping, making the business case, et cetera. I think a lot of times businesses are so quick to just assume they understand and start to rush in trying to make changes or thinking, we can just go ahead and bypass needing to do this, that it can end up causing a lot of churn later on, or like, leakage over time across multiple areas within the business. That's actually a great segue into kind of, when you've been brought in to stabilize kind of chaotic technology environment in the past, what is usually the first thing that you kind of focus on fixing? Is it the data? Is it defining that problem? Like, I guess, where do you usually start?
I usually start with, if it's a monitoring type of, you know, system support, I I put in a monitoring solution that will be able to give me insight that I'm not getting. All I'm getting is the system's not working, the system's down. Tracking uptime and those things are really not good business metrics. You need to be able to drill in and find out what the actual errors are and what it's doing in terms of impacting the business. So I put monitoring tools in because I believe with enough information, any problem solvable. And so I always that's my approach in doing that, plus the mapping in terms of knowing how each system relates to one another. Because many times in the mid-market, people will have worked in that system for their career and the whole time that they've been with that company, and they won't look outside of it. They just have their head down, looking at that. They're not looking at anything else. And you have to be able to connect the dots for people to show them, here's what it is, here's what it means, and here's the impact. And I normally do that through error rates, tracking throughput in terms of the cycle time and how long it takes. Because just take the closing process, the financial closing process. You go into some businesses and that's one of the first questions I ask is, "How long does it take you to close your books?" And depending upon their answer, it tells me right away how good they are and what their issues are. And the other item I always look at is their return material authorization, right? Because when people send product back, it's a telling metric in terms of how long it takes to process, can they do it accurately, and do they know the cycle time? Because that's a direct impact on customer satisfaction. So you can look at a couple of major business processes and you can get a good sense in terms of how well that business is run and if their cycle time. I've been in businesses that it took them 20 days to close the financial books. So that's all they were doing is they were closing the books all month long. And so that that points me in a direction in terms of, okay, is it a data problem? Is it a mapping problem? Is it a process problem, et cetera? And I always look at technology as being the last component that I'm gonna put in because it's really people, process, and technology.
I love that answer too. Lisa knows I'm always super big on data and start with the data of what is the data telling you. So I'm here for that. I love that answer.
Yeah, I feel like with data, and it kind of goes back to the foundations of things like education. You begin with the end in mind. And when you do that, you have more successful outcomes. And with AI and things like that, beginning with the end in mind would be data. You have to begin with the data so you have the good outcome. Anyway, my little pulpit moment
A
there.
little Stephen Covey coming
Thank you
out.
for bearing with me. Well, that kind of leads into an AI question. How is AI actually exposing data quality problems that manufacturers have been quietly ignoring for years? What's your take there?
So I can give you an example we had on closing, right? We were having inconsistencies and couldn't solve the problem, and we put the data into AI, and it told us what the problem was. And I have another example that I'm, um, working on around engineering drawings and the cycle time that it takes because the way our business works, we have to send somebody out to be able to do a survey. They take pictures, it comes back. We have to get engineering drawings and they go through a couple of cycles and then we have to have the customer sign off before they can do it. And I took all the information and threw it into AI and it came up with the analysis in terms of these are the top issues. These are potential alternatives that you can look at. And I can do that with Claude in, an hour. But you still have to have a person who reviews the data because it's not always correct. AI is not always going to give you the correct answer. So you always have to pull the thread in terms of, okay, let's walk the process. Let's look at what it's telling us and let's validate that the feedback that we're getting from the tool is actually valid
Oh, it will lie to you all day long.
all day long, all day long. It depends on, right? I mean, you really become a prompt engineer and how use that, the persona that you use in terms of telling it, I want to be a master data management analyst, and here's the data that I'm looking at, or I want to look at it as a subcontract administrator, and tell me where my issues are in terms of some of the contracts that I have. And it will usually, when you can tell it how your voice is, the types of things that you expect, and then use the right persona, you're moving toward getting better data, but it still requires you to check it. It's trust but verify.
Totally. I'm going to build on that question and that answer. So, if a manufacturer is serious about adopting AI, what do you see as kind of the foundation needing to look like before they flip the switch? And I know we've already talked about data, but are there other facets that you see as kind of needing to go hand in hand with that data readiness? I guess your perspective on that front.
Well, the first piece, you have to make sure that the trains are running on time, which is system stability and having insight into what really drives different processes and different things in your environment, right? Because everybody's based on some sort of database, everybody's based upon scripts, queries, Excel spreadsheets, et cetera. You've got to understand what those impacts are, and then drive your mapping in terms of the data. And then you look at how do I introduce the right technology, because I look at it from a cycle time perspective. What are the areas in manufacturing that take the longest? And right now we have a product that I'm working on, that if we can reduce our cycle time for engineering drawings, I will be able to reduce the cycle time for the product in terms of our delivery to our customers. And that drives revenue and that drives impact in the business. So those are the types of things that I look at in terms of being able to have an impact in the manufacturing business.
All right. To round out this section of the podcast, I'm going to ask you a high level question. If you could give every manufacturing leader one piece of advice they could act on this week before they buy another piece of technology, what would that piece of advice be?
Go find the spreadsheets.
Straightforward, direct. I'm here for that.
Yes.
Find out where your manual workarounds are. In a midsize, you always have tribal knowledge. You always have single points of failure. Go find the spreadsheets. Go find the workarounds. And that is your waste. And then have a passion around reducing waste in your business.
That's excellent.
We're gonna shift gears into our lightning round. So, Stephen, we're gonna kind of throw some questions at you, and we're looking for you to kind of just short answer first thing that comes to mind. So, I'll actually start. What's the biggest myth about modern manufacturing that you would like to debunk?
Well, modern manufacturing is not all about automation and robotics and putting in the latest technology. It's still based on process and understanding that process. So, unless you have that and unless your process is repeatable, then you can't deliver a quality product, because repeatability is quality.
Great answer. I love that. If you could give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would it be?
It would be slow down to go faster.
I feel like I say something along those lines in so many meetings. That is so great. I am coming back to this podcast later and I'm airing it in meetings.
We're always in a hurry,
Yeah.
but you need to slow down and be able to go faster.
Stephen, what trend in manufacturing do you think is overhyped?
rip and replace. Because most of the time, it's a data issue. It's an integration issue. My CEO said, "Well, maybe our ERP system isn't that bad after we've applied all the work that we've applied, because everybody hates their ERP system. In every business I've ever been in, they hate their ERP system, and it's because of those issues, right? Because they don't focus on the data problems, they don't correct those, and they don't have a master data management program that has clear ownership for those master data elements."
Next question. What book, podcast, or resource has most influenced your leadership style?
Mm. Recently, Ethan Mollick's work has influenced me.
I love Ethan Mollick's work. I'm always following him on LinkedIn.
And then I also, follow, Chamath, Palihapitiya on the All-in-One podcast and his Substack. He's such a smart person.
We love some good, smart people to follow. That is always good.
And of course, I have always been a fan of the Toyota production system, and that, early on was a big influence for me.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, I think we're just at about time. But before we wrap, I wanted to kind of just ask for folks who are interested just in kind of following along with your work, what's the best place for them to go?
LinkedIn.
Perfect. We'll make sure to follow you there. And thank you so much for joining us today. We've learned a lot and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Definitely. And thank you everyone for tuning in to Manufacturing the Future, and be sure to subscribe and look for more episodes.